If you're looking to get your first pet snake, there are lots of choices out there. And all of them, for the most part, are pretty good. Except for venomous. Don't get venomous. Probably ever. But even with that said, the choices can be quite overwhelming. Do you want a colubrid? Do you want a constrictor? If you want a constrictor, do you want a ball python? Do you want a Burmese python? Do you want a boa constrictor? There's a lot of stuff to consider. So, for me, my first pet snake was a boa constrictor. And I'll walk you through my logic, how I ended up there, and some of the tips, tricks, and other things that I found along the way. I'm Jay. This is Jay's Cryptic Creatures. Let's go learn something. So as we begin to determine what a good first pet snake is, let's get the most important thing out in the open, and that is doing your research. Regardless of anything that I say here, please continue to do research, whether it be YouTube or books or just general internet searches. There's lots of outlets to get information, and doing your research is critical. Now, with that said, when you begin researching to get your first snake, you may get a lot of hits saying, ball python, potentially colubrids. And like I said previously, there's not necessarily a wrong choice. It's just maybe better, easier, etc. So jokes aside, don't get venomous. 99.9% of people should not be keeping things that can potentially kill them. And then also with that said, getting a snake that's 18 foot long or has the potential to get there, is a whole host of other challenges. So we'll walk through a couple factors to consider and why I ended up going with a boa constrictor as a first pet rather than a ball python or a colubrid. This girl right here is Izzy, my Moonglow Boa. Moonglow is anery type 1, hypo, and albino for her genes. So as you're picking up your first snake, you might not think genes are important, but they play a factor in two different ways. So one, it's a consideration for what the snake's going to look like. So obviously as you're getting this animal probably as a pet, it's probably good to pick out something that you like to look at and what strikes your fancy. Secondly, you want to be sure you know the genetic makeup just by the off chance you might move into breeding one day. So you want to make sure you have that information up front so you understand the genes and the lineage. So as I said, when I decided to start doing my research, I had an affinity towards boas. And where this came from is my mother growing up kind of lived in a we'll say air quote zoo. She had a litany of animals between her and her brothers growing up. And one of them I remember hearing was a 6 foot long boa. And I always thought that was pretty awesome. So as an adult and I started moving into keeping animals, I always gravitated towards boa constrictors. So that was the start of my research. In doing that, I saw lots of information on ball pythons. And, for me, looking at the colors and the patterns in the ball pythons, I thought they were pretty awesome, but there was certain aspects to them that moved me away from the ball pythons and into boas. So continuing to focus on appearance. Like I said, the ball pythons have tons of genetic mutations that change the pattern, color, and they're beautiful animals. Boas have quite an array themselves. So as we're seeing here, we have a Moonglow Boa that is almost pure white, which is leucistic. But that gene variant is present in boa constrictors as well. So you can get a pure white snake. In contrast, boas have a gene called IMG that will generate almost a completely black snake. And then they have many different morphs in between there that manipulate pattern, color, and even size to a certain extent. So when you're comparing ball pythons and boas, they're pretty head to head there. You can more than likely find something in the boa constrictor gene pool that will strike your fancy, will stand out to you visually, and really be impressive to your friends and family. So we'll say check that box. You can probably find a boa constrictor that looks cool to you. Next, we'll talk a little bit about size and caging, because those kind of go hand in hand. This beautiful girl here is Hectate, the hypo blood boa, and the blood gene will come into play during this kind of quick topic. So when thinking of a boa constrictor, right, they are certainly bigger snakes, but they're not giant snakes. Frankly, out in the public, if you were to pull out a 6-foot boa constrictor, people will equate that to, or ask you if that's an anaconda, which is ironically sort of correct. But anyway, in the purpose of this discussion, boas come in a huge range of sizes. So you could get kind of the, true red tail boa, like a Suriname or something along those lines that are locale based, and they get quite big, usually over 10 feet. And then you have actually outliers that can get significantly bigger than that. And that's a pretty big snake to handle. The Boa Imperator, more the central boa constrictor, Central America boa constrictor, tends to be a bit smaller. Like you're typically going to be in the size range of 6 to 8 feet, somewhere in that tune. Something that's comfortable to handle as an individual. And then even smaller still, you can get other locale boas like a K boa, which probably isn't getting much over 5 feet. So another thing to consider as well is the males are typically quite a bit smaller than the females. So you can really end up picking out the size boa that fits what you're looking for, right? A good practice here, to start is, if possible, go to your local mom and pop pet shop, if that's available, or the breeder, and start to handle some snakes, so you can get a feel for how big they are. Talking and understanding dimensions in your mind or on a piece of paper is one thing, but then seeing and handling the animal in real life is significantly different. Aside from that, getting your first snake as maybe not a hatchling, although I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea, a yearling that's well established but is small enough so that you guys can grow together is awesome as well. That makes a big difference, because then you two can both have a respect for each other. You're not feeling nervous, and the animal is like I said, growing up with you. The other great thing about that size, if you're looking at more of the Boa Imperator, at 6 feet, you can get by with a 4x2 cage. I got those behind me right here. If you end up getting a bigger snake, you can bump that up to a 6'2", but by no means unreasonable. Versus when you start to get into Burmese pythons, reticulated pythons that are 16 plus feet. Housing and caging certainly come into play there. As for general husbandry, I have a video that I'll link at the end of this. At the end of this video, discussing setup, parameters, etc. But for the most part, 4x2 cage, get the humidity right around 70%, a hot spot of 90, a cool side in the low 80s, and you should be all set. So by general care, they're not a terribly complex animal to take care of. Certainly a little bit more complex than, say, a crested gecko, but I don't think outside the scope of an easy pet. So those are a couple of key things for considering size and caging. Another consideration with any purchase is the price. The boa constrictors have a price range similar to the genetic makeup. It can go from one extreme to the next. So cruising around Morph Market, I saw that normal boa constrictors are going for somewhere between $75 to $100. Again, that can vary depending on other factors as well, versus, going to a reptile expo. But $75 to $100 for a normal is it seems to be the going rate right now. When you start to get into kind of, we'll say your basic genetic morphs, you have albinos, which are quite popular, and the aneries, also quite popular. They're somewhere right around $250 to $350. So again, not terrible when you're looking at buying a pet. And then on the opposite extreme of that, you see the IMG boa, some very interesting morphs getting up into the $1,000 range, couple $1,000 range. And then at the far extreme, at the timing of doing this video, I did a search on the most expensive boa constrictor on Morph Market, and that was $15,000. Again, that's probably not a pet, that's an investment animal, but I thought it serves a purpose of showing the bookends. So you can shop around and figure out and find a price that works for you, and you get the genetic makeup that really fits your eye. Again, the biggest takeaway here, if possible, meet with a local breeder, talk through what's going on, and they can really help you get the animal that's going to be the best fit for you. Some other things I considered while picking up my first snake was how active they would be, as well as eating. So, touching on how interactive they are, boas are pretty interactive. When they start to get bigger, they can be maybe a little bit of a workout. These snakes are both arboreal and terrestrial, so they do spend quite a bit of time in trees. So they're strong, and they like to wander, we'll say. So it is a bit of a workout, and it's kind of fun. Versus some other types of snakes that are maybe more comfortable staying still or chilling and hanging out. Again, neither one is right or wrong, depending on your personality and what you're looking for. I wanted something a little bit more, interactive. The other consideration, like I said, is the food and the eating. So, boa constrictors, for the most part, can stay on rodents their entire life. Maybe really big boas will move over to rabbits at some point, but you don't have to have farm animals. Like if you were to have a big Burmese python or a reticulated python, where you're getting small pigs and animals like that. So, rats are a pretty staple diet for the boa. Additionally, I've never had an issue getting a boa to eat, even newborns. This is probably one of the bigger factors that leaned me more towards boas than ball pythons. Is you would hear about ball pythons going off of food, and I just wasn't comfortable with that. And that was just purely a personal decision. Again, do your research. It's something that isn't hard to overcome or to understand. But for me, I wasn't 100% comfortable going in, and then as a novice, not understanding what going off food meant, how that was going to affect the snake, what I should look for, etc., etc. So the feeding response for the boa constrictor and their appetite, we'll say, was one of the driving factors for me to move that direction. Now, with that said, too, their feeding response is pretty intense, so that might put some people off. But like with most other things, just handle with care, do it, with full attention, full confidence, and you'll be all right. So that's a big consideration that I took. This is Lilith, one of my bigger girls, and she'll be going into her first year of breeding this fall. So all things considered, I picked up a boa as my first pet snake way back when. And I thought it was a great decision. But that's not for everybody, and understandably so. The big takeaways are to do your research and don't rush it. Understand what you're trying to look for and how you're trying to do it. Like I said, working with local breeders, being around people that have done this before is all great advice. Like everything else that you do as a hobby, as a job, at some point there's a jumping off spot. So, with the appropriate amount of research, appropriate amount of learning and experience, you'll be quite fine. So don't be turned off when considering a boa constrictor as a first pet. I think it's a pretty solid choice. I'm Jay. This is Jay's Cryptic Creatures. Like, subscribe, and let's learn something together.